Okay, well, I'm very happy to be here. Um, Pat's agency and mine were recipients of the of grants in 2005, and it was under the titles of the grants were Develop Adoption Services and Supports for Youth Who Wish to Retain Contact with Family Members in Order to Improve Permanency Outcomes. It was one of the longest titles ever. So there were 9 of us, 9 agencies, and we met as a cluster of agencies throughout the grant and shared ideas. The Illinois project was the Family Connections Project, and during year 1 of the grant, we developed 4 curricula. And one of them is for judges and court personnel, and it's delivered in a classroom format. Another curricula was for foster and adoptive families. It's also a classroom-based format. The workers' curricula is computer-based and is available at www.adoptionlearningpartners.org. And the 4th one that we developed was for youth, and it's a process, not really a classroom style. And the curriculum was all on helping these 4 groups understand the need for permanence. Recruitment is like here, and you really need to go through all the preparation part to get to where you're actually going to be recruiting. And one of the focuses with all of the groups was helping them all understand the importance of maintaining connections with birth family. And actually I have some DVDs that I'll pass out at the end that were made also during the project of 3 emancipated youth talking about their the importance of birth family connections for them, and 3 adoptive families who have open adoptions. It's just a 15-minute DVD that you can use. It's also available on the National Resource Center, or National Child Welfare Resource Center for Adoption website. So today, I really want to focus on on working with the youth in the project. We worked with, I think it was 77 youth during the years. Our organization is the State Exchange, so we were not an agency that had the children in care. Therefore, we worked with the case managers and the children's agencies. And just to kind of keep in mind, during the 4 years of working with the youth, the worker turnover, which is not news to any of you, was really very, very high. We lost some of the youth in the project to jail, some to mental health facilities, but others we found some permanency. And so I just want to kind of talk with you about the process that went on with the youth during the time we work with them. One of the things that's important to note is the trainer, the person who worked with the youth, is an African-American male who is very, very engaging, and his personality and style was one of the pieces that really made the youth engage with him and talk about the process. The other part of it that was really important, we started out having a foster care alum kind of come and talk to each group, but eventually he became the co-trainer and really developed during the 4 years till he began to sound like a social worker. But he, of course, was the person that the young people most related to and believed, because he had grown up in care, he had emancipated without permanence, he had been homeless, he'd been evicted, so he could counter the youth's arguments all the way through this process. Okay. So the goals of the youth process were to identify important connections for the youth, help them define family, foster care, and adoption, assist the youth to view the move to a family as a positive goal, help youth express feelings, fears, and fantasies concerning living in a family, and develop realistic expectations of family life. Many of the youth were in residential programs. Assist youth with integrating their past and their future, explore recruitment options and assist the youth in accepting some individual recruitment efforts, and to create an atmosphere where youth feel free to express feelings, questions, fears related to past, present, and future connections. There are also some icebreaker exercises that the trainer would do. It would depend on the group. Sometimes we bring a group of youth together and found they knew each other. They had lived at some residential place someplace in their life. Others, they did not know each other, and the trainer would do an icebreaker to get them, talking. And the favorite question you'd ask, these are all boys, young men, 16, 17, 18. So the icebreaker is, what's your favorite car? And they all went on from that and began to form a group. Each time the trainer and the youth establish ground rules, and they determine what they are. So sometimes they'd come up with only one person can talk, stay on task, everyone participates. Sometimes it was no cell phones, sometimes no cursing, and sometimes whatever is said in this group does not leave this group. At this point of what is a connection, the trainer showed a DVD that's, anybody know who Leon Poe is? He's a basketball player. He was with the NBA, but he had been homeless. He had had a really rough life, and he talks about the importance of a mentor and a tutor to him, living in a car with his mother and 6 siblings, to going on and going to college and having a basketball scholarship, and I think he was with the Boston Celtics. So it's actually that you can get it on YouTube if you're ever going to incorporate. But it's one of the things that the young people, again, relate to someone else who's being there, who's been in their shoes, not us. One of the other things that was important that all of the youth talk and participate in the group, and so they would get rewarded. If they spoke, they got a piece of candy, or sometimes they got little toys or something. So everybody, candy's a motivator for everybody, no matter whether you're 16 or 50, right? 60. Okay, then they were to list, this is all done in the group, to list some personal connections, people, places, and things. So the people part was fairly easy. Then for places, they talked about the importance of neighborhood, many of them of not only being in contact with family, but their neighborhood, and things they felt close to. Some of the young people came up with pets, but what was important. Then the next part was identifying their lost connections, and they did have to specify actually people who were alive, because many of the youth had lost birth parents and grandparents to some of them had been murdered, and they'd seen their parents murdered, so they needed to they wanted to talk about people who were alive. And so they share that as a group. And then how did it make you feel? And by this time in the group, they're beginning to be willing to share with each other how they felt about some of the losses. In the other group trainings, the other curricula, we use that game, the exercise that I think everybody, I hope, has played by now, where you put down your 5 closest people on 5 pieces of paper, and then the moderator makes you give up one at a time. And that still is the most powerful exercise for adults. With the youth, they talked about it. then the question is, would you like to reestablish these connections? They use easel paper and writing on names of all the people that for each of the different youth, and then the trainer would share that with case managers for any kinds of follow-up. Then we got into a discussion of what is a family and the different types of families. And it's interesting, you know, just because you live in a foster family that you really understand the difference between foster families and adoptive families and what a family who provides guardianship really is. So that was a helpful kind of thing just to define what we're talking about in permanent family and permanent connections. The objective in discussing this is to get the youth to focus on family rather than independence. You know, these were adolescents. These were mostly 16, 17, 18, 19, whose eye was on being out the door, being away from the department, being away from people telling them what to do, and basically did not understand why they need an adult in their life. We were trying to help them take a look at why adults are important, why family is important, and how they really can be advantageous. Again, categories of family that you've got. Again, this was confusing for many of the young people over their life and the various times and places that they had lived. But the birth family is forever. They're always a part of you. A legal family, adoption or guardianship, and what that can provide you from a permanent legal perspective. And then the people you're living with. There could be another group that is parenting. The youth provided examples from their life. Well, and this was like, why do you need a family? Because many of the youth, of course, are in touch with their birth family. In fact, at the very first training, one of the youth said to me, "You're really stupid if you think we don't see our birth parents." So I certainly didn't want to fall in that category. But they don't tell because, especially if their rights are terminated or there obviously had to be something pretty rough going on in their life to have been separated. So it was helping youth understand that visiting your father in prison every Saturday is not going to be a helpful resource to you when you're out on your own. So we started talking about what kinds of things that a family does. And providing food and shelter, helping with career decisions, offering guidance and support, providing a place to go for holidays. Now, the youth came up with these. Well, this isn't, again, some of the things that we would lay out for them, but they would all come up with providing more grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins. And it was, again, hard to get them off the dime of thinking about their 22 or 23-year-old friend whose couch they could sleep on if anything went wrong, versus having somebody who's committed to them that would be there no matter what, either legally or as a mentor. The trainer and the youth trainer, co-trainer, they take turns leading these sections and discussing these areas. And Victor is the young man who's co-trainer, who's 30 now. And so he's really, he'll tell his story, and he really was very good at countering various youth reasons of why they didn't need people and how they could take care of themselves and how they had things in place, because Victor had been one of those people who'd looked forward to independence, got an apartment, and within 3 months was evicted. So he was able to work with them really very well. Okay, blending all of these folks together. Trying to think of some of because I went to the very first training, and actually we got permission of the youth because I was not the trainer. I was just this person with the grant, and the youth gave me permission that I could sit in. I'm trying to think about some of the, Wesley was one of them, who had been secretly seeing his birth family and didn't, but he had never told anyone. But again, I think that he was just another example of how, again, his father and his mother were not going to be able to help him as an adult if he got, if he needed money, if he needed a place to live. One of the ways we were really able to kind of hit the kids and why they reach the kids, because they needed adults, was to get their driver's license. They had to ride with somebody who was an adult licensed driver. And they, so their friends weren't able to help them. So it was very, very basic with these folks. Before talking about family, we needed to tell them and help them understand why adults were handy people to have around. So then we talked with, again, the group talks about the family of origin and the importance of that. It's where you get your heritage. The family of circumstance, where are you living now? And then this is where the youth got a chance to talk about what their ideal family was, so that the caseworker could then begin to think about finding a good fit between what the young person thought of as what a family they could actually accept and live in, and the families that are out there. Okay, and then the first, I think it said it was like day one, but day one, the first part of the training is 2 hours. The last thing they do at the end of that 2 hours is Daryl introduces the concept of an eco map and shows them, well, actually, I don't have one on the slide, but he takes a circle and puts a heart in it, and, has the child put their name in it, and then they're to list in the inner circle all the people that they're close to, and then on the outer circle, other people that they're not really close to, but that are a part of their life. And this young woman decided, I don't know if you can see, to make a face out of it. She put little hair and ears on it, but this was one of the times that the worker had not really heard about all these people before. So then they break for lunch, and we always fed them, because you kept them there. If you let them go outside, they disappeared. Right? Now, the other thing, we actually have 2 versions of this training. When we started the grant, the whole idea is we thought we were going to be working with youth 14 to 17 with TPR, and we were just really kind of helping them we were going to do recruitment. And when we found the youth, it was like, we really had to, we do, so there is a version on the website that can be used for if you have a group of people like that, but we really redid day 2 to start working with youth who were very closed off to any kind of contact with a permanent family. So then everybody had done their echo maps, and then there was a discussion in the group of who was in their family and their significant others. Then one of the exercises, and it's hard, I can't really show it, it's a graph that we actually had up on the wall, and started talking with young people about degree of openness that one has with birth relatives, and trying to, I guess, actually teach that whole concept of you could have, something, a high openness where the whole permanent family and birth family are all visiting in each other's lives, to a very low degree, which is actually in the young people, they all text. So they all liked this exercise. It was a very eye-opening that things were not black and white. You didn't either have an adoptive family that was closed and you never saw anybody again. So they all liked this one because you could, you know, again, it was very active. They could walk around and stand by what degree of openness they thought they'd be comfortable with their family. Okay, so then we started talking with the group about the future. And this is where we could start talking about some recruitment efforts for a permanent family. And talking again about what with maintaining the connections, who decides about the connections and which ones will be maintained, how should the connections be monitored, what and when should a prospective permanent family know about my connections, who should assess or be a support if concerns or issues should arise, and finding a permanent family. How are people recruited? Actually, under the finding a permanent family, our staff during the grant really worked with the case managers a lot in mining records, because we learned some of who their connections were through this group process, but we also looked through their files. We also, for some of the relatives that were found or significant connections from the past were found, they were no longer at their address, and we used U.S. search, the verbatim, to find families. One of it, we found a brother, an adult brother for one of the youth, and they had, of course, lost contact after years in the foster care system. And the older brother was actually living like 4 blocks away. And it was just so, this is a young man, wrote us a thank you note. I mean, very few people write thank you notes. We were absolutely floored that this young man wrote a handwritten thank you note for finding his brother. And so that he and his brother was functioning very, very well and was going to be very helpful to him. The project staff, we also did life books with all of the project youth. And then if there were not folks found of relatives, significant others through these efforts, then we did start talking with the youth about being listed on the state exchange and what some of those recruitment efforts and being, our listing book is on the internet actually. And developing an individual recruitment plan for each youth. Thinking about my past. Actually, for some of this, you can look at the whole curriculum guide. This is an overview of it, and the curriculum itself, again, is on the National Child Welfare Resource Center for Adoption's website. So then what I want to talk about, the evaluator, I want to try to remember the thing about the social worker's job. That was, if you use that part of it, you really have to define for youth what you're talking about here. Otherwise, the whole group got into venting about their horrible social worker. So, well, and especially kids in residential care had some real issues of having care staff, and they had plans for independence, but we had real trouble with one. The young person was in independent living, but he had TPR and wanted to be adopted, and we had difficulty finding workers attached that had any knowledge of adoption. Okay, so are we getting, okay. Each youth, when the training is over, they fill out an evaluation, and of course we would ask different questions now, but because it was a grant and we wanted to ask the questions consistently through 4 years, we ended up with questions that sometimes were difficult for the youth to answer. So the evaluator then wrote a synopsis of the youth training. The youth were very positive in describing their overall impression of the training, but they would say it was good. That was their, but they could have said worse things, right? But they said it was good. One youth actually wrote out exactly what the training aims for, of increasing youth understanding of the importance of family and of ongoing connections. And so he said, I think it was good, it's helpful and enlightening, and most importantly, you get to know where you come from. 2 comments on how the training was beneficial also captured the essence of the training and what permanency actually means. Helped me understand guardianship, adoption, and independence better. Another youth said, I learned you can have connections with people in independence or adoption. Youth were less likely to report that their attitudes or beliefs had changed, and that was how the question was worded. However, then they would say, but now I know what permanency means. So they had learned something, but again, we would redo these questions. The 3 youth who reported change related it to their acceptance of the importance of permanency. As one youth stated, it changed because I was thinking about independent living. Now I want guardianship. And that's the end. Any questions? It's good stuff.
Thank you very much.
I wanted to talk a little bit about the federal grant that we had just completed the 5-year experience. It was a really wonderful experience because we were in a cooperative agreement with 9 other agencies, including Maryland's agency. And the idea of the grant was a terrific idea. I forget the initials. When the federal government comes into your states, they do a SFCR for you, CFFR review. What they noticed before the federal grant was that lots of kids didn't get permanent homes because they were still connected to their relatives. Now, their relatives weren't going to prevent them from becoming homeless when they got discharged from foster care, but that was the reason to just let everything be copacetic, let them stay in the group homes, let them stay in the treatment centers, let them stay in the foster homes, because, you know, they're still connected to their relatives, but nobody was planning for their life after they aged out of care. So they issued this particular federal grant, which I thought was a great idea, because there is absolutely no reason in the world why you can't recruit lifetime parents for kids while they still have connection to their relatives. And so we had a great opportunity to apply for that. You know, we only consider one permanency option as an option, and that's get every kid a parent. However we do that. Usually it would be through adoption if the kid is freed for adoption. But if not, we would get somebody to make a lifetime commitment to them beyond their years in foster care. So this was a great grant for us to be involved in. And we don't have our final product produced yet because it just ended like last week, and we might have a 3-month extension, so we can still do a little bit extra work on it. But we've had 101 kids referred to the project, and 47 kids have gotten permanent families out of that. And the interesting thing, and we actually in our proposal said it would be likely that half would get permanent homes. But the far more interesting thing that we had discovered is more about why the kids who didn't get permanent homes did, because the idea was the kids were the barriers to their own permanency, because the kids don't want to get adopted, because the kids are connected to somebody else. And what we had found is that when we were able to work with the kids directly, and we planned a brief short-term counseling that was going to be about 4 sessions with our adoption counselors. And that turned out to be about 6 to 8 sessions. But there was very few kids where we were in like some sort of counseling relationship with them that wouldn't give us the go-ahead to recruit a family. The kids we didn't find homes for were the kids who fell off our charts because they went AWOL, because they might have wound up in jail, or because they aged out of care, because the population that we went was always the oldest of the oldest, or their workers put real barriers in us having access to them. But the kids that we had actually access to were the most resistant kids in the system who didn't want to be adopted and all. You know, once our staff had a chance to really sit down and talk to them, I mean, we just learned it wasn't really about being not wanting to be adopted. It was about their life experience tells them that every grown-up abandons and rejects and hurts them. So why should we actually sign up for an adoption when, of course, it's not going to happen, particularly if I got my connections and all. So it really was interesting working with kids by listening to what they had to say, but not obeying what they're saying. Because and we went in with the attitude that if your kid told you they didn't like school, you can't force them to go to school, but you're never going to stop talking about how important school is. And if your kid had a disease that could be easily cured by going to a doctor, and you can't force them to go to the doctor, but you would never stop talking to them about, this is important enough to go to a doctor and get some medication for it. And that's the approach that we took with family. We wanted to focus everybody's attention on the fact that kids need homes after foster care. And most of our kids were assuming nobody wanted them, so why, involve themselves in this process? But what was interesting on the kids that we had found homes for, they were willing to become part of the process. One of the major things that we've always done is made them part of our training. They come in to talk to our families about what it's like to be a teenager in foster care, in congregate care, in a group home. And we have waiting families in our audience. We have families in training in our audience. And so many of the kids in the project actually met people. And these were the resistant kids who said nobody wanted to be adopted, or who were putting all sorts of barriers in their way. These were the kids that were there, not really with any great expectation that somebody would have any interest in them. But they were there to be our consultants, really. They were our trainers. They were the ones who were forming our prospective families about what it's like to be a teenager in foster care. And I would say pretty much out of the 47 kids that had gotten homes, maybe a good half of them just got placed with somebody they had become acquainted with through the process of sitting down with the counselors, hearing how important it is to allow us to recruit permanent homes for them, and then just coming in and being part of the process, and then meeting, and then finding out that somebody heard them, met them, had a real interest in learning more about them, and then they, as sensitively and as possible, they move forward on those processes. And we placed a lot of kids like that. But the most obvious and best way, and it was true in other federal grants that we have gotten, and it was true in this particular grant as well, we found lots of kids from people that they knew. Look at that. The light bulb just blew out. Unless it takes a little time to warm up, but we'll see if that is. Oh, good. All right. But when we're looking, we had a 5-year federal grant in New York City where we were recruiting permanent parents for kids in congregate care. So these kids lived in residential treatment centers, they lived in group homes, and they lived in hospitals. And we were focused on where the kid is and who the people were in that kid's life. But simultaneously, we never stopped recruiting from the general public. We have our own cable access program. We get lots of phone calls from that. We actually do a live radio broadcast. That's more of a support to our families, but sometimes people from the general public are listening to that. So during the course of the 5 years, actually, no, I'm sorry, this was a 4-year grant. 1,143 people walked through our doors, which is a good number. And during the course of the same 4-year period, 120 teenagers, average age of 16, had gotten a permanent home. And so that's 10.4% of the people who walked through our door actually gave a permanent home to a teenager. But the really interesting stats was how it broke down with our recruitment strategy of recruiting people who knew our kids, as opposed to just bringing in people from the general public. Almost 1,000 people walked in from the general public. A third of them finished the 10-week training and preparation that we set up for everybody who has any interest. 11% of them actually got licensed, And during the 4-year period, 37 teenagers had gotten placed, 4% of that 987. And 35% of the licensed people got a kid during the 4-year period. A lot of them got kids after the 4-year period, but during the 4-year period. And then the recruitment strategy on there is we were going to the kids, finding out who they knew, who cared about them, and we brought in the people that the kids led us to. And during that same 4-year period, we brought in 154 people who were connected to our kids. And the most amazing, interesting thing about it, 81% of them completed the entire preparation process, which means they really gave this a thought. And that really dispelled one of our greatest myths, that if you bring in a relative or a friend or somebody, you don't want to put them through the whole training. That's going to turn them off. And these folks want to learn whether they can do this. And our whole selling point for them is not will you adopt Johnny, your relative or your friend or the person that cares about you or you care about so much. Why don't you just come in and think about it? See if this is something that you can do. And 81% of them finished the process of the learning experience. 84 of them had gotten licensed. Now, if you think, members from the general public, we had 106 get licensed. Almost 1,000 people walked through our door. 154 people knew our kids. 84 got licensed. And of course, that shatters another myth. All these horrible relatives are all criminals, and these people the kids know are all bad and all that. They are the highest licensed people in our organization. And they would not have come into the system were it not for the kids themselves. The kids brought these people, these new people, into our system. 99% of them got a kid because they came during the 4-year period. They came for a kid, and then they got the kid, and the placement happened relatively quickly after that. So in this current federal grant, we placed a lot of kids after they've gotten over whatever resistance with somebody that they knew as well. Lots of relatives, but also lots of other folks like teachers and coaches and employers and best friends' parents, and a whole variety of folks. When you got a teenager who lives in a community somewhere, that teenager has loads of connections. And what we had found is we can bring just 2 of those connections to walk through our door. One of them will actually do it. And I think every individual has dozens of constructive adults walking in and out of their lives every day. Oh, one of the other things, I don't know if any of you get the NACAC newsletter. But the NACAC newsletter, in the most recent one, had reported about the states who are having the highest success rates. And I know some of you guys are among that. And they were constantly quoting people who were using this idea about going out to bring in people who knew our kids. That's definitely the absolute best way to find homes for teenagers. One of the interesting things that we had experienced during this project was listening to the other agencies. And the other agencies, the other programs around the country, all were bringing in all sorts of people into the kids' lives. Some called them mentors, some called them hosts, some called them a variety of things. And it got me thinking about that because of this number. Oh, gosh, I forgot, I can't shut it off or else I'm going to have to wait for it to come on again. But what was interesting, I guess that makes the bulb last longer. Or it's really, really old, even older than I'm used to. But one of the interesting things was we kept hearing over and over and over again that the kids appreciated having somebody in their life who were working and helping them out who weren't getting paid. And that theme kept coming up and up and up and up. And despite that, so prior to this federal grant, if I'm sitting in a room listening to people talk about mentors and hosts and people who aren't going to actually give the kid what he needs, like a parent, I would just become very frustrated and sort of close my ears and not pay much attention because I think that does more detriment, potentially do more detriment to a kid who needs a family than not. Now you're bringing in people into his life and they're not actually getting a family out of it. But because it was such a powerful, persuasive things that these agencies were doing, it totally changed the focus of everything that we're going to do after the federal grant. Because, the number that I had up there was we had 987 people walk through our doors. Many of them couldn't be licensed or didn't finish or couldn't be licensed even if they did finish the classes because of situational reasons. They might be unemployed. They might not have the right amount of room. They might just decide this is not the time in their life that they can be a parent. But these very same people have a lot to offer kids. And because we went through this federal grant, we had decided that we are going to do what we have come to call a volunteer recruitment mentor program, that we're going to bring in volunteers from the general community who have interest in our kids to get them into a one-on-one relationship with our kids for the purpose of, yes, you can mentor, yes, you can host, yes, you can do this or that or the other thing, but understand what we'll be training you to do is how to find these kids' families, how to reach out to the people in these kids' lives and bring them into this process. And so when we're going to bring volunteers into our kids' life, it'll be for the only purpose that anybody on my staff or volunteers will get involved in the kid's life is to work on getting the kid a parent. Because once we have a parent, now that kid's got the foundation that they need, where volunteers and mentors and people like that and connections, their family connections, are even more valuable. But without that parent, without that foundation, we don't really have a heck of a lot that we're offering them. So being part of this federal grant is going to continue at our organization a new movement, and that is to get more people from the general community involved. And prior to this federal grant, it was if you can become a parent, we'll get you involved. Now we're going to say if you care about kids, we're going to get you involved if you understand this kid's greatest need is to get a parent. And the techniques we use, it's not brain surgery. It's not like you couldn't teach people how to do it. So, and we actually have a current federal grant in diligent recruitment, and we're teaching our volunteers and our staff about family finding and the model that's going around the country right now about reconnecting kids to their birth families and functioning members in their birth families and bringing those folks into this process. And we've always done that in one way or the other over the years, but this is to be a very concerted effort to teach our staff and our volunteers to use these techniques to find homes for kids. So it's a very powerful movement that we can bring more people in, because and research had showed us, our evaluator had been saying this for years and years and years, and everybody knows, the kids who have the most attention from somebody, usually their caseworker, are the kids who get families. This project totally showed that. When the caseworkers allowed us to have complete access to the kids, those kids got placed. When they made it difficult, those kids didn't get placed. And just because a kid went to jail or AWOL'd or aged out didn't necessarily mean we wanted to stop working on them, but the system just has a way of shutting you down when those things happen. So we figure getting more people from the general community involved as volunteers, teaching them the skills about how to find lifetime parents for teens, and really showing them how it's not all that difficult to figure this out, because really the teens lead us to most of the people. The family finding techniques will lead us to more people. But the bottom line is, I think every teenager right now could be placed within 5 square miles of wherever he or she is living because of the people that are walking in and out of that person's life. And that's the major permanency outcome that I want to talk about today. And I would be much more interested in maybe doing an exchange of questions and answers. I just wanted to make that a general foundation of what I want to speak about. But I was wondering if anybody had any questions about this whole subject of permanency options, outcomes for kids, and all of that.
I just had a comment, and that was that it's the same thing we see with photo listing on the Adopt Us Kids website.
Yeah.
The kids that get placed as a result of photo listing, it may not be because someone saw them on the website, but usually the workers who are doing that
That's true.
are doing other things as well.
That's very true.
So I agree with your comment.
Yeah, yeah. Some of these other techniques actually, yeah, absolutely. The kids that will probably get homes is when they have somebody who's actually caring enough for them to do recruitment stuff. And that's absolutely true. And that's why we want to get more people involved in times where we have less money to do it. But we can work with volunteers, and it's easier for my staff to supervise one-on-one a volunteer who's going to be doing work with kids than to give my staff an unmanageable caseload. And we got a lot of people who walk through our doors that really want to help kids, and when we realize they can't be parents for a variety of reasons, they certainly are being signed up to do volunteer work. And when we're clearing them through child abuse, we're clearing them through the criminal record check. We're making sure they take the 10 weeks of training, and mainly because the volunteers, once they reach out to people who know our kids, their pitch to them is not adopt a kid. Their pitch to them is to learn about adopting them, because we know that if somebody will walk through our door to take a learning experience, half of them will actually follow through. And that's you know, and almost everything that we've learned about what we do has been a result of a discretionary grant where we're able to have evaluators really fine-tune the practice. I mean, it really is. It's been working very, very well for us. But this project, in terms of turning me around on just listening to what the positive things people had to say about the mentors and the host and the bringing people in for a weekend and a whole variety of things, is the general public wants to help kids. So we should let them do it with good training and good preparation, but don't ever let them forget the kid's greatest need is not to get an A on his math test, even though that's a good thing to start a relationship with. The kid's greatest need is not whatever it is that the mentor might be doing. The kid's greatest need is to have a family, and there's no reason in the world why the mentor or the volunteer couldn't be instrumental in getting that through a one-on-one relationship. Any other questions? Yes, go ahead.
From Idaho. And my question is around your volunteers and your mentors.
Uh-huh.
We also have a mentorship program for our youth. And one of the things we struggle with are the mentors ending the mentorship.
Yeah.
And so I'm curious if you were able to have any success in getting commitment from the mentors.
Well, here's the thing. They're going through our whole adoption preparation process. We're not signing up students to work a semester. We're actually only letting people do this if they can make a long-term commitment. And there's research that is actually coming out, done by our evaluator, Rosemary Avery, where she had said mentors can do a lot more harm than good if they're short-term and if they're temporary. Because yet again, the kid's connecting to somebody who's going to leave. And those programs do a world of good for the mentors, but they're not doing anything for our kids. So the way we're pooling it is these folks were coming forward to be parents, and they decided they couldn't do that. So asking them to make a long-term commitment as a mentor volunteer is not as big a stretch as if you got a local school that's got a kid available for a semester. You know, we're just not. I mean, we are doing mentoring differently. And we use the word mentor only because everybody else does, but I really look at them as recruitment deputies. They're helping my staff find kids' families. They're doing the exact same job my staff does, but they're dedicating the time to an individual kid. And the focus is not getting lost. This kid needs a family, and that is their greatest need. But, you know, so we're using the spirit of volunteerism to get that done. Yes? And Jill, I can see your name, but I can't see where you're from.
I'm from New Mexico.
Okay.
Just could you speak again about the feedback that you got from the youth about appreciating working with people that weren't getting paid?
Well, no, that was the thing during our 9 clusters. The rationale for bringing volunteers and mentors in and why it's such a good thing is because they kept saying the kids really appreciated having somebody who didn't get paid. And that thought came up a few other times. Now, what I was thinking is, what difference does it make? They're still homeless when they're 21, so they didn't get paid. But rather than be negative, I said, well, then maybe we can use that to help kids get families anyway. But I never heard a kid actually say that. I'm just reporting on what other people said. Yeah. But it was persuasive enough that I said, okay, this is an idea that we should be doing more with. Yes?
This isn't a question directly to you. It's my frustration from being a small state is that oftentimes we
What
don't.
state is that?
Utah.
Okay.
Okay.
Big state.
And we're the best for time to adoption, and so it's hard to say that our 100 kids still need families like every other kid to get federal grants for like recruitment and projects. And so here's my just question to you, that maybe you're in a similar position, a smaller state where we're not very competitive with you people that have big populations, and especially populations that maybe have special needs or minority. I would love to see grants come out as supportive to research that's already proven. I could do with $25,000, I could get this kind of thing statewide, but I don't have that little bit of seed money to get it done. Anyway, it's just been an ongoing thing that with a tiny bit of money, I could do so much.
Yeah, that's interesting.
But it's never offered that way, and so that's just my plea, is that even when you're doing well, it doesn't mean you don't have kids that are hurting and that still need all that extra effort, and it's really hard to get that just little bit of seed money, to do something. I went around the state, before I was hired, I was a consultant for Utah's DCFS, and I went around the state and was just asking our mental health workers and our family support centers that do some respite care and things like that. I asked them, what would you do for $5,000? What would you be willing to do for us? And we got full programs out of that because they were just extending a little bit of what they already did. And so I'm just sort of throwing it out there that little bits of money can go a long way if it was asked for that way. And especially when we find these things that have real promise and we know they sort of work. How do you get them going then? Anyway, so.
All right, so Heidi, can you give that lady $25,000? I think she could do a lot with that. Question?
I would just say that there's the Adopt Us Kids has micro grants for family support groups, so you might want to talk to Adopt Us Kids about that. But I think you should talk to California, Illinois, because they just get a whole bunch of money, or Texas.
Anything else that's on people's minds, particularly on this whole subject of whether kids want to be adopted? Is that on anybody's mind? Because that's like a major obstacle. And my answer on that has always been, well, so what? What they need, sometimes they don't fully understand. And I'm not talking about forcing legal adoption onto anybody, but we have a choice when kids stay in foster care that they can be in a permanent place or a temporary place. And when a kid says they don't want to be adopted, we put them in a temporary place. And we don't have to put them in a temporary place. We can recruit a home where they're going to stay long after the years in foster care are over. And we have a lot of kids that don't get adopted until they're fully grown adults because it finally stuck in their head at 22 or 23, holy crap, this family really is committed to me. Whereas they didn't believe it at 16 or 17, but we still recruited the lifetime family for them at 16 or 17. And because they would be staying somewhere while they're in foster care, and we punished them for having an opinion by saying, well, now we're going to shove you in a temporary place and you can become homeless when you're 21, rather than recruit a lifetime family for them anyway. Because adoption is in the mind of the grown-up. The kid, when their brains develop, come around to the idea, but they don't always will say, yes, I want to be adopted. And they have a lot of really good logical reasons for saying no, but that's not a good reason not to find them a permanent home, a permanent family. Yeah.
A big source of frustration for us is, we don't have a large number of waiting children, but we have a few children who are waiting who had been adopted, come from a dissolved adoption.
Yeah.
And these are children who are giving up. They become hopeless, they have serious issues, mostly mental health issues, they're depressed. And, we are running out of ideas of how to recruit for these children.
Well, let me tell you, every kid that we get is in your category, and a significant percentage of them have been adopted before. When you only work with the teenage population, that's what you see. And the interesting thing is most of the ones that have been adopted before were adopted at a younger age, and they got sort of dumped when they were teenagers. But then we're putting it back on the kid to say somehow the kid is responsible for not having a family when it's these adults that constantly abandon them because they were speaking with their behavior rather than their language. But any kid, particularly those kids who are adopted, they lived in a community for all those years. There are people in that community that could be reached out to, whether they say they want to be adopted or not. But every kid has got people in their lives that can be reached out to. And sometimes it's the staff in the residence that they're living in or in the hospital that they're in. One of the best ways that we solved the border baby problem in the late 80s is we started asking nurses to come forward to adopt children. And that was the first time the seed ever got planted in my head. Why can't we just do that for everybody? Why can't we bring in people who had developed a connection to that kid and make it a relatively threat-free environment by not asking them to adopt, but asking them to really learn about it and really consider it. But every kid you have, no matter what their disturbances are, they got people in their lives who care about them. And if they were adopted, then there are people in wherever that community that they came from. Well, it could be next door neighbors. It could be people in that kid's church. There could be people wondering, what the hell happened here? And not until we reach out to those people will they ever have the opportunity to come forward and see if this is something that they want to do. You know, one of our federal grants that we applied for, and it wasn't this one, it was the one before this one, they actually gave us the category of kids that we, by the way, you say you only have a few waiting kids. And let me tell you, the category. No, but I'm just saying, if you say you have a few, I'm going to tell you right now why you have a hell of a lot more than what you're thinking. Because the categories that we said were kids who were actually freed for adoption and waiting, but every kid with a goal of OPLA, who you didn't know where they were going to live when they aged out of care and sitting in a group home, we're working on those kids as well. And those were the categories that we had come in with a federal grant. And the county said to us, oh, no, you got to include another category. And they said, you got to include the kids who were adopted who are abandoned by their adoptive parents. We're not freeing them for adoption because they would lose too many benefits or something, but they need a permanent home as well. So it's a big issue in the category of teenagehood. But just like this federal grant, where we were stopping permanency because of connection to birth family, what you don't want to happen for these teenagers is we're stopping permanency because they're being abandoned by an adoptive parent. You know, we still have to find permanent homes for them. And the best place to look for all of them is in the connections that they've already had all their lives. Yeah. And where are you from?
Virginia.
Is that your name or your state?
That's my state.
Okay. And what's your name?
Pam Cooper.
Oh, hi, Pam.
How you doing?
All right. I've been down there enough. I'm sorry,
right.
Pam. But it's my eyesight, Pam.
Oh, that's
I didn't have my glasses on. Oh, Pam. Okay.
Right. My question is, share with us a component of your curriculum that helps families unpack the no in terms of being those permanent connections for young people.
Well, you know, we got to unpack the no with the kids, but with the families, interestingly enough, we got to deliver a canned curriculum just like everybody else. You know, whether it's Pride or what we have to do is GPS2 map. But what we have done, and now I think the city is going to be emulating us. I'm going to a meeting next week where they want to transform the GPS2 map that's more friendly to teenagers. And I thought that's a great meeting to go to. And even though I have to fly out that same day, I'm attending as much of that meeting as possible because they might want to start doing what we have done. And what we have done is we incorporated in the curriculum a whole session where waiting kids, teenagers come in, and not to be the poor waif that's begging to be adopted, because most of our teenagers won't say they even want a home. But they come in to explain what it's like to be a teenager in foster care and what it's like to move from place to place to place, from home to home to home. And, you know, and we know lots of connections are going to be made just doing that. We also do a panel of parents who've been to hell and back with their kids and who can speak to why they kept them anyway, you know, through the trials and tribulations. And I, in the last class, what the curriculum calls for beginnings and endings, I do a whole workshop on unconditional commitment and how it really is the only love that matters to teenagers. And I really help people hopefully bring a spiritual approach to the pain that kids will bring them and that relationships do bring them. And in our culture, relationships tend to end if it brings pain. But in parent-child relationships, you can't have that. So you either have a choice to deal with the pain or do it the foster care mentality way and send your kid back. And we're saying there's no way in hell we ever going to agree that you send your kid back. So we incorporate commitment philosophy into our training, despite the fact that we are training people in the two avenues, because that's what MAP does. You train them for foster care, you train them for adoption. And what we're doing is we're bringing a commitment mindset of parenting to temporary foster care as well. Because most places, foster care gets translated into, since it's temporary, you can be conditional in your parenting, conditional upon the good behavior, conditional upon the fact that we don't want the child to disturb anybody in your household and all of that. And what we're turning that around and saying you can't be a parent if you don't plan on being a parent. And parents, except for the bizarre world of foster care in the United States of America, parents keep their kids. And even temporary, you got to keep your kid until their permanent home is achieved. And you know, so we do really do a heavy dose of what parenting means is commitment first and foremost over anything else. So that's yeah. We got 5 minutes. Come on. Any other questions? Well, then let me just end with the little thing that I just wanted to share with you. A couple of things that I don't know if anybody knows. So maybe I'll do a quick education on a permanency planning goal that really screws up a lot of our kids' lives. And of course, that permanency planning goal is called OPLA. And that's another planned permanent living arrangement. You know, whenever we become more uncomfortable with something, we create bigger words for it. It used to be emancipation. Then they changed it to independent living. And now they call it another planned permanent living arrangement. And New York didn't like that. So what New York did is they increased the wordage. And New York calls it another planned living arrangement that includes a significant connection to an adult willing to be a permanent resource for the child. Blah, blah. And when they came out with that in 2004, 2005, I made a lot of fun of this, okay? Because I said, forget significant connections, forget permanency resource. Kids need parents. Get them a parent, and then their connections and resources will have meaning in their life. But whoever came up with this in New York State back in 2003, 2004, when they put in this extra wordage, implied at least it should be a human being, right? So that was progress, and it was fortune-telling as well, because by the time 2006 came around, we got the President of the United States to sign a bill changing the language. It used to be simply another planned permanent living arrangement, and it was up to us to figure out what the heck that meant. So they wanted clarity. So what the President changed the law to is some other planned permanent living arrangement, which may include a residential educational program, which is the government statement, even though I know the practice is not this way, but the law has teeth. And the child welfare establishment, congregate care establishment, made sure that got included, which says every one of your kids could sit and rot in institutions as long as there's an educational program. Every one of your kids can do that, and you're following the law. You could bring in a tutor in your group home. Oh, that's a residential educational program. So what we have to really understand is we have to look at OPLA as just another way of saying this kid needs a home before he gets discharged from foster care. Because, so by the way, just so you know, if you want to, here's the real acronym, SOPLA WMLI-AREP, okay? So it's not OPLA, it's that. Some other planned permanent living with, which may include a residential educational program. Most people don't know that. That's out of the law that was signed by the President of the United States. So anyway, when we're talking about the other options, mentoring, volunteering, connections, resources, all very important to support a family after you get them a parent. But it's the parent that actually makes the difference. And it's the foundation for everything else that flows. You all heard that expression, it takes a village to raise a child. But I tell you one thing, when I worked in my neighborhood, Mrs. Hauser would see me doing something in the street, and she would come down and correct me. And the implication was, if you don't change your behavior, I'm going to go waltz down the block and tell your mother. The village don't work without the mother or the father or one or the other or both. And once you have that foundation, mentors, volunteers, connections, resources are all valuable people to bring into our kids' lives. So with that, I guess I'll end my 5 minutes. And thank you very much for inviting me here. I really appreciate it.